So we have yet another edition of Europeans realizing just how strange the USA actually is. And the USA is indeed very, very strange, and that's coming from an American who has also lived in Europe and now lives in Asia. Without further ado, let's get into this first video. POV. You're from the UK seeing the average house in the USA.
Ooh, this is nice.
Okay, so right off the bat, this looks like it's probably in the South. He's definitely somewhere in the South, probably the Southeast. I want to say Georgia. Somewhere Georgia, North Carolina, kind of that area of the US. At least based on the architecture I'm seeing here. It's more common in those areas to have larger homes like this, I will say. But even taking that into consideration, this is far from the average house in the US. Please do not buy into the hype of American houses all looking like this. Now, I will say that you can get a much larger house for much less money in those regions than you can in pretty much most of Western Europe. I don't know about Eastern Europe, but definitely Western Europe, and especially London or anywhere in the UK. But the houses are not necessarily high quality. What I mean by that is when you spend enough time inside of these houses before they're actually built, you realize that it's basically just wood framing with a brick facade, more or less.
Girl, this audience is you right here? Okay.
Yeah, even the floors. And I don't want to sound like I'm a hater because, look, if you have a house like this, even if it's not the highest quality, then I would say you're winning. You're doing well. So, again, I don't want to come across as a hater or anything, but when I look at these wood floors, I mean, it doesn't scream high quality. When I look at the crown molding in the corners, you didn't know I knew what crown molding is, did you? When I look at the crown molding here in these corners, it doesn't look like the highest quality or what you would expect from a house that looks like this on the outside. I could be wrong. Let me know what you think of this house if you're from Europe, but the quality standards are definitely significantly lower in the US.
This is nice. Girl.
This is definitely in the Southeast. It could have been in Texas before based on the front, albeit without the stones that you usually see in Texas, but any house that has siding like this, that has this material, is more often than not going to be in the Southeast. And this siding right here is incredibly annoying because you have to make sure you wash it frequently enough for mold to not accumulate, because the Southeast is a very humid region. So from the outside looking in, it might seem like a good deal, but you have to know what you're getting yourself into.
Oh, this audience is you right here? Okay. They don't smell like roaches in here or nothing.
Yeah. I don't know if he's tall or if the ceiling is just low. I wouldn't expect this hallway to be this crammed for how big the house looks on the outside.
This is so nice. And look at this. Girl, how you get sparkles in the back of an animal? What is this?
Yeah. This is, again, not an average American house, but it's fairly typical. I hope that makes sense. Look at that TV that they have. They got that big TV. And I feel like that ceiling work is also pretty characteristic of a lot of newer homes in the US. But architecture preferences aside, because look, let's face it, this isn't everyone's cup of tea. I personally think this looks pretty good, but I'm also American, so that's just my natural inclination and preference. If you're from Germany, you might think this looks hideous. I don't know. Let me know in the comments what you think. But the point that I'm making is that while it is true that you can get a large house with your own 2 or 3 car garage and your own backyard with a deck and everything like that, this probably has around 4 or 5 bedrooms. So we'll say a 4 or 5 bedroom house, maybe 4.5 bathrooms, probably for 600,000. I don't know if I'm out of touch with the housing market, but back in the day when my dad and I would go visit these types of neighborhoods throughout the DFW area where I grew up, these houses were going for 450-ish, 450,000. That was around 2012, 2013. I know a lot has changed since then. But I mean, 700 tops in Georgia. 700 tops, I would say. Again, I might be out of touch. But it's smoke and mirrors. It looks good, but the reality of it, especially when you have a tornado or something that could potentially expose the build quality or the lack thereof, is a lot less pretty than what you see right here. But I can see how, especially if you're young, coming from Europe, and you go to the US and you see how many houses look like this and the price that they're at, it might seem borderline impossible. But just know that there is always some kind of catch. On to the next post. One of my biggest culture shocks when I moved to the USA, and we're going to mute this one because it has very, very loud and annoying copyrighted music. Going to the grocery store, realizing I was overdressed. So that's kind of a double culture shock right there, because just going to the grocery store, seeing how big these Walmarts are, and this looks like a regular Walmart. They have the neighborhood Walmart, which is more similar to your European grocery store with mostly just groceries and some toiletries and household items. You have the regular Walmart, which has the electronics and all of that stuff, has the clothing, just basically almost anything you could think of. And then you have the big Walmarts. I think they might be called Super Walmart, or no, I think that's for Target. They have Super Target. I don't know, but if you're American, you know what I'm talking about. They got the big Walmarts where you can go and get your tires changed. You can get all types of things done. But I know I've said this in a lot of my videos, but I prefer the European grocery stores, primarily because of the food selection. Not only is the food more affordable, but it's higher quality. And as a vegan, I found that the availability of high quality vegan options was much further along than what you'll find in Walmart, especially when we take affordability into account. And then as far as realizing she was overdressed, you're never gonna see anyone dressed like this. Anyone from the US at least, dressed like this to go to Walmart. Maybe Target, maybe Whole Foods. Maybe Whole Foods you might see a lot more high-end athleisure. Nobody's getting dressed up to go to Walmart. Walmart, you're probably going in your pajamas and house shoes with a bonnet on, so on and so forth. Walmart is a place where you go to get your groceries and get up out of there, because generally the stereotype is that Walmart attracts more trashy people, whereas Target is a little more upscale. I know in some places like LA, I was literally just told to not go to Walmart at all, to not even take the risk. But even growing up where I grew up at, you can definitely see a pronounced difference. So she might look a little more in place if she went to Target. But yeah, Americans, they are not getting dressed really to go anywhere. Anything that involves daily errands, they are not getting dressed up to do that. And I've mentioned this before, but a big part of why that is because you're getting there in your car, and then you go and get your groceries, and then you leave. And you spend most of the day in your car, in your house, or just generally in isolation, which actually explains a lot of the mental health issues that Americans have, but different discussion for a different day. You're spending so much time in isolation that to take the time to put together an outfit like this, it's just not worth it for most people. On to the next video. Culture shocks as a Brit staying in the US.
I'm a Brit staying in the US. I have been here for a month now. I have 2 weeks left. I thought I would do some culture shocks that I did not realize would be a culture shock to me because I thought I knew enough about America. One thing is tipping culture in coffee shops. I understand servers understand that they don't get paid minimum wage, so they need the tips to live on. I will not be tipping you at a coffee shop. Sorry, that might be an unpopular opinion, but I just do not think that it's worth a 20% tip.
And she is definitely on the money with that, no pun intended, because in coffee shops, granted, I don't really drink coffee, so I haven't really been to a whole lot of coffee shops, but it's my understanding that at Starbucks, for example, they are getting paid at least minimum wage. Now, the reason why it is ethical, it's almost a moral obligation to tip at restaurants, at sit-down restaurants in the US, is because you can reasonably assume that unless you're at an upscale establishment, your server's probably making around $2 to $3 per hour, and that's no exaggeration. And they cover the rest with tips. And if they don't get to the minimum wage by the end of the day, or I guess at the end of their pay period or whatever, their employer will then cover the difference between what the minimum wage is and what they actually made. But I have a sneaking suspicion that if somebody were to not reach minimum wage for a few pay periods, they would suddenly find themselves unemployed. Because, of course, in the US, we have at-will employment. So that's why, in my opinion, at those sit-down restaurants, everyone should tip until they can figure out a way to make the business model illegal and start maybe profiting more on the actual consumable items instead of the labor itself. But when it comes to coffee shops, or if you're going to get an acai bowl, or you're going to get fast food, there's really no reason to tip. Unless you're just feeling incredibly generous that day, there's no reason to tip 20% when somebody's just making a coffee and not even bringing it to you, just calling your name when it's done. Just doesn't make sense.
Another thing which I was aware of but I didn't realize would take some getting used to is sales tax. Seeing the price of something and then going to the till and there being an increase and you just not knowing what that increase is, takes some getting used to. That is so strange.
That is one of the most frustrating things. Now that I think about it, I never took the time to figure out if they do that here in Asia or not. I'm in Vietnam as I film this video and we just left Thailand. I never really thought about that. If they add the tax afterwards, I guess because everything's so cheap that I don't really take the price into account when I buy a lot of stuff. To a certain extent, that is. I'm not rich, but obviously the cost of living here is so much lower. But in the US, not only do they add the sales tax at checkout, so you don't really know how much everything's going to cost unless you know that specific local tax rate, but also things just tend to cost more in general. So it's incredibly frustrating because you're already mentally stressing out about how much you're expecting to pay. You get to the register and then they add the sales tax on top of that. It's just insult to injury.
I wish they just included sales tax so you knew what you were paying for an item in a store. Another thing, and these go hand in hand, is one, stop the four-way stop signs and the first person who gets there goes. I think that's just a car crash waiting to happen. Secondly, turning right on red light.
So that four-way stop sign, you know what, that's an interesting thing because I think most Americans don't realize that that is a very American thing. Maybe they do that in Canada as well. I'm not particularly sure. But when I went to the Netherlands, I realized they don't really have a whole lot of stop signs at all. And basically the way it works is whoever's on the right, so if you're coming this way and the car is coming from your right side, they have the right of way, hence right of way, which I'm not sure if that's actually where the term came from, but it would make a whole lot of sense. And it seems a lot more intuitive and simple, especially compared to the four-way stop sign where everyone gets there at the same time, and then you have to play that weird game where you come out a little bit and then they come out a little bit and then you stop and then you do this, but they don't see you. Very frustrating. And in LA, believe it or not, they have this one intersection. If you're from LA, Beverly Hills specifically, you know what I'm talking about, but they have that intersection where I think it's a 6-way stop, 6 or 8-way intersection. I forgot if it was primarily stop signs or traffic lights or a mix of both, but very stressful experience driving out there, especially with all those expensive cars. But that is a car crash waiting to happen.
And some of them, they have to put a sign saying no turn right on red. Like, why can you not just have an arrow that turns green when you can turn right? Like, I just don't understand. Lastly, your amazing, huge...
So as far as the turning right on red thing, honestly, I think that turning right on red shouldn't really be allowed for the most part. It should not be allowed because, to her point, it's a car crash waiting to happen. And a lot of times, a lot of car crashes in the US, by the way, I have no statistics to back this up. This is just my assumption based on the close calls that I've personally had. Most of the near misses I've had, either as a pedestrian, as a cyclist, or as a driver, have come from either someone turning right on red or someone making a left turn across traffic when they didn't have an arrow. Because in the US, basically, they have this thing where you can turn left across oncoming traffic. You just have to yield. So it's an unprotected left turn where you have a green light but not a green arrow. A lot of car crashes happen that way because basically when you have that on both sides, these two lanes, so both of the lanes that are looking to turn left, they block each other's line of sight. So you have to play this weird chicken game where you kind of slowly creep out until you can crane your neck forward and see the cars coming. And sometimes by the time you see them, it's too late and you just lose your life.
Huge bathroom gaps. What is that? I think it's so stupid.
So I think the reason why they have the huge bathroom gaps, now that I think about it, is because the bathrooms tend to be free in the US. So that's the trade-off. Honestly, as someone who drinks a lot of water, you've probably noticed I've taken a lot of sips of water throughout this video and throughout my other videos. As someone who drinks a lot of water, that's a trade-off that I'm willing to make, but I can see how that would be incredibly uncomfortable for people coming from Europe, especially the UK, because my first experience with a European bathroom was at London Heathrow. And when I saw those stalls for the first time, it blew my mind. I was so confused. I was like, there is no way that I just have basically a whole room to myself in this bathroom. But sure enough, that is the norm in much of the rest of the world, including Asia, Japan specifically. But let me know if that's a trade-off that you think is worth it.